we talk about Star Wars a lot on this and how disappointed we are into kind of like what they're producing at the moment. But I will say, I watched the Skeleton Crew just out of curiosity the other day, only the first episode, and I was pleasantly surprised, especially because it follows a bunch of kids around, actually. It was just good, kind of like good, just like adventurous fun, pretty much. It's about this like sort of boy who's on this planet, which kind of like the rest of the Star Wars galaxy don't believe it exists, just because of sort of how nice and how different it is from sort of the rest of the Star Wars universe, or the rest of the sort of planets that most people are from. And essentially, this boy is obsessed with Jedis and thinks he's discovered a Jedi temple in the mountain somewhere. So he goes to sort of explore it. And then these sort of few other kids are also there, sort of looking at the same loot, essentially. And it turns out it's not a Jedi base. It's actually a starship. So they kind of reboot this ship that's been sort of kind of like dormant for ages, and it blasts them out of the galaxy. And it blasts them far, far away from. I'm actually spoiling the first episode, but I think this is kind of like just premise and setup, anyways. To be fair, but it kind of like blasts them far, far away from where their home is. And essentially, they're just trying to figure out how they get back home. What I loved a lot about it was just kind of like the character dynamics. And I know it's like kind of like child actors and stuff like that, but just kind of like seeing just some of the fun, playful interactions, some like the teas and stuff like that was just like just entertaining. It was just like really well done in terms of sort of how they established the characters in this show. So yet to go into episode 2, but once I do, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it plays out for the rest of the season.
Is it actually aimed at children, or is it more universal audiences?
Hard to say so far. Hard to say, yeah. Again, like a lot of the main characters in this are children. Only one of the kids' dads are a side character in this as well from the first episode. Anyways, I mean, where they kind of like end up is, you know, they're just a bunch of like kind of like innocent kids from this like planet where, again, it's very, very different from the rest of the galaxy. And they just find themselves amongst the scoundrels, the like kind of like the ragged bunch in the rest of the galaxy. So yeah, we'll kind of see how it plays out in terms of sort of where it's mainly targeted at.
Well, I mean, like I can get on board with like teenagers or even children as characters, but like a movie can be focused on child characters and not be a children's movie. You see what I mean? So it's kind of not explicitly aimed at children.
So far, I wouldn't say it's explicitly aimed at children. Yeah.
Because my reaction to Skeleton Crew and reports that it was not bad was like, I'm glad somebody made some good Star Wars, but I wish it was something I was more interested in. Mm-hmm. Right? That's kind of why I was asking, because it certainly presents itself like a children's show, right? In terms of like the marketing and stuff like that.
No, yeah. That's why I said we'll see how it plays out, because again, it's got the child focus behind it, but it's more about the themes and like sort of kind of like not the messaging, but like kind of like the story that's unfolding in it, and sort of whether it lends itself well to sort of both children as well as sort of adults that might be watching it with their kids as well. So that's kind of what I want to see, how that evolves.
I watched Lady Snowblood, which is a 1973 Japanese martial arts revenge thriller, which is about this woman who is born in prison in Meiji-era Japan in the 1870s. And she essentially trains her entire life to become this amazing swords fighter, and then goes out to find the people who are responsible for the death of her mother. So her mother was essentially captured by a bunch of criminals, was grossly mistreated, and then ended up in prison for being associated with these prisoners. And then Lady Snowblood was born in prison, was released eventually, and then has dedicated her life to bring the people who ruined her mother's life to justice. And the entire thing, like there seems to be a pattern in Japanese revenge movies where like Western revenge movies seem to be all about catharsis and getting back at people and empowerment. And Japanese, but like Asian revenge movies in general seem to be more about how destructive revenge is. Like a few months ago, I watched Old Boy, which is a Korean revenge movie, and that has a similar idea where like the pursuit of revenge ends up killing you, or like destroys your life. And Lady Snowblood is kind of similar, where there's all these very bloody, well choreographed action sequences where she just beats up fools with like her umbrella, katana, whatever. But it takes a toll on her as a person. And even when she achieves justice, she's not at peace, kind of thing. So it is kind of interesting to see if you're used to other kinds of revenge movies. This is now the second one in a few months that I've seen. Like, one was Korean, another was Japanese, right? So not exactly the same traditions, but there seems to be a pattern here where, like, there's just a different take on revenge than what we know. Like, in American, a revenge movie will all be about, beating up the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
And it's a good thing that somebody does something, right? It's fundamentally the root of the superhero genre as well, right? That somebody has power and uses that power to bring justice to the bad guys.
Yeah.
And that's, like, at least adjacent. Like, not all superhero stories are revenge stories, but a lot of superhero origins are rooted in revenge, and the genre is at least adjacent to revenge stories or vigilante stories, right?
Yeah.
So we tend to have a much more, like, I have no idea if this is true or not. Like, I've not studied this. I've not looked up like what people have said about this. It's just an impression I get after having seen now multiple. Like, it just seems to be a different conception of what seeking a revenge does to a person. So that was interesting as that. And also, it's just like a really seminal action movie. Like, it's not back-to-back action, but the fight sequences in it are pretty good. And if you've seen Kill Bill, Lady Snowblood is what Quentin Tarantino was smoking when we made a Kill Bill, right? Like, it's a direct influence.
Yeah.
And like, I saw Kill Bill like 20 years ago when it came out, and back then I wondered, like how can you come up with this stuff? Like, this is so creative. And now I know where he came up with it. So it's not a ripoff exactly, but it's a very close homage.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was interesting to watch on that level. It's not like a fun popcorn movie where you like watch just somebody beat up the bad people. There's a bit more to it, and it's less fun in that way, but it's a really good movie.
Well, I started watching a Netflix series called Raising Dion. In episode 2, I think I'm on episode 2, so I haven't really seen much of what's going on. But from what I've seen so far, single mother finds out that her son is developing or has superpowers. I don't know how much more he can do. Well, yeah, he is. He's each episode from the 2 episodes I've seen, he finds out he's got more powers. So yeah, so he's definitely developing superpowers, and then she tries to figure out how he's got superpowers and like why. And I think there's like dangers as well that's coming. Obviously, he's got superpowers, and there has to be some sort of antagonist threat. She pretty much just protects her son and tries to figure out the mystery behind his superpowers. And obviously, she's a widow as well. Michael B. Jordan's in this movie as well. I think he was a dad. He's dead. Well, I don't know if he's dead actually, because there was a scene where you kind of like see his spirit or ghost or something like that. You see a bunch of them. So I don't know how his story is gonna end up developing. But yeah, it's all right so far. I'm still going to give it more of a chance because, like I said, so far I'm kind of engaged. The acting, look, as a kid, like I said, with kid actors, I always give them grace. So he's all right. He's actually doing good. He's doing a good job. It's just, I just find it very hard to watch kid actors. So that's something which I've started to, I'm trying to train myself to start watching more films with the main actors being lead, the main lead actors being kids. Because Stranger Things, I want to catch that as well. But it's just the whole kids being the main actors is just so off-putting. Obviously, because the genre is horror, and it's like that's always been a pet peeve of mine. But yeah, so far, Raising Dion is cool. It's definitely I'd recommend it.
So the best thing I watched this week is A Pack of Lies from 1987, and this apparently made a fairly big splash when it came out, but I had not heard of it before. But I kind of stumbled across it randomly, and it's essentially the true story of the Soviet spies that got arrested in the 80s in London. Those events inspired a play, which inspired the movie, and it's from the point of view of their friends and neighbors, right? So you've got this suburban middle-class family in like 1987 London or something like that. And it turns out that their best friends are these Soviet spies. And essentially, the government approaches them and says, hey, we need to stake out in your house because somebody on your street is up to no good. And they basically kind of make a nuisance of themselves a little bit, and they stay for weeks and weeks. And the whole thing is essentially like this really interesting drama. And it's mostly from the wife's perspective. And it's a lot about this idea of obeying authority and people's reputations and the impressions people make, and this whole idea of not making a fuss, right? Like about like where they have objections to what the government is doing and how they're doing it, but they don't want to cause a scene. And so there's like this ongoing, like slowly growing conflict between the husband and the wife, where they have different attitudes towards what's going on. And the wife doesn't want to lie to her friends about this, but the husband says if they're doing this, they probably have a good reason. And it's just a very character-focused drama that kind of unfolds over the course of the sting operation that kind of disrupts this quiet London suburb. And it's not like it's just a really solidly made movie with some interesting characters and just a nice little conflict at the center of it that kind of allows different characters to bounce off of. It takes a while to get to the point, but I really enjoyed Pack of Lies. So mine is definitely one aimed at adults. So I've been rewatching Silicon Valley, which is a 2014 comedy series essentially about the startup company in Silicon Valley, about this guy who works for a tech company, and he kind of develops this revolutionary algorithm that has the potential to be worth billions at some point. And so he goes off to found his own company, and he essentially tries to kind of make it in Silicon Valley. So he kind of tries to secure funding for his company, and he tries to persevere against rivals and people trying to take advantage of him. And he's tempted to compromise his ideals to make a whole lot of money very quickly. So it's a very intelligent treatment of what Silicon Valley was like at that point, kind of at the height of the tech boom. It has a lot to say about tech culture and corporate culture and the superficiality of it all. And it's very, like, if you want like a masterclass in satire, I think Silicon Valley is it, because it shows that it understands the subject matter it's talking about, and it does a lot of work to kind of justify its point of view and its thesis through the plots and the decisions characters make, by showing them be awful people or make compromises or succeed or fail and suffer setbacks or victories. And on top of that, it's just very funny. It's infinitely quotable. It's just a joy to watch. So the best thing I watched this week was The Borderlands, also known as Final Prayer, which is a found footage religious horror movie from 2013. The premise is essentially that the Vatican sends investigators to a small rural church in Devon where a miracle has been reported, and they are essentially sent to do the initial investigation of that claim. And the team are essentially this experienced investigator who has seen so many fake miracles that he has stopped believing in them. The vaguely religious tech guy who has never seen a miracle before and is easily impressed. And then you've got the church bureaucrat who believes in the teachings of the church, but thinks all of its miracle stuff gives the church a bad name. And those three are essentially sent to this small remote village to investigate these reports. It's kind of a found footage movie, but it doesn't make any good use of the found footage conceit. Like, there's this whole thing about how the church wants no gaps in the reports, and so they have to wear these cameras at all times, but it doesn't make any sense. Like most found footage movies, it does not really justify why the movie looks the way it does and why people keep filming and so on. Also, the ending is not the greatest, but in between there's this really interesting atmospheric and at times creepy story about three people who approach something that's really going on, and it's not clear immediately what it is, but it might be a hoax, it might be a genuine miracle, it might be something else. They're waiting for gear to arrive, and they're waiting for the priest to show them to the church and stuff like that. So they have a lot of downtime in between their experiences. And so they talk about the faith a lot. This is like one of my pet peeves, where usually when movies approach this topic, it gets very stupid very quickly because it's just not very well thought out. It's full of cliches and platitudes and so on. And this movie, I thought, had interesting things to say about this, right? Where characters actually have interesting and coherent perspectives about this, and their reactions to experiencing something otherworldly, where it's not clear what it is exactly, at least initially, is interesting and believable. And the found footage conceit makes it very grounded, and it's like a very natural acting style and stuff like that all helps in making this feel like real people. And so it's just an enjoyable watch, and like not scary exactly, like you're not gonna get any jump scares, but it's just people being in a creepy situation and kind of trying to deal with it in believable ways. And on that level, it's a well-made movie and definitely worth a watch if you're into that subject matter.
Mm-hmm. I think where my ears perked up was when you mentioned about sort of the different characters and the different backgrounds that they had kind of going into this, sort of all sort of mixed into one, because I immediately know that, you know, if it has a good storyteller, then it has sort of those interesting kind of like character moments and interesting kind of like conflict in terms of sort of belief and sort of how they sort of approach various, you know, the various kind of like challenges and various sort of situations that they find themselves in. So definitely sounds super interesting in terms of sort of like that concept of it. Again, for anyone that's like super into like the religious side of things as well, I can imagine that there's like some interesting conversations sort of, or interesting kind of like I said, perspectives come out of it as well.
Yeah, it really hinges on those three characters approaching that topic and being in that line of work for very different reasons in very different ways. And that's kind of really the appeal to it. It gets often recommended as a cosmic horror movie, and I don't think it really is. It is a little bit, but I was going into that look based on those recommendations, and that's what I wanted, and I was a little bit disappointed. But what I found instead was actually one of the better religious horror movies I've seen. So I think expectations with this are really important in the sense that if you expect the wrong thing from this, you'll probably have a bad time. But if what I've said sounds interesting, you'll probably enjoy this one.